You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 25th of September 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
Full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible.
But for how much longer? We'll have the latest from the Middle East as Israel continues its strikes on Lebanon and Iran warns that Hezbollah cannot stand alone. We'll also have the latest on the UN General Assembly in New York.
I think we have fully entered a post-American era. And by that, I don't mean that America is absent, but our influence and our impact is substantially reduced.
We'll also hear why Egypt sending arms to Somalia has angered Ethiopia and why Boeing's pay offer to its striking workers has angered the unions. Plus the papers and the tech news too. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, to look at what else is happening in today's news. British nationals in Lebanon have been told to leave the country immediately because of the worsening security situation there, and 700 UK troops have been deployed to nearby Cyprus to help with any evacuation. The US Justice Department has filed an antitrust lawsuit against Visa, claiming the financial services giant stifles competition in the debit card market. And Swiss police say they've arrested several people after the suspected death of a woman in a so-called suicide capsule. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, despite growing calls for restraint and the soaring number of dead and displaced, Israel says it's launched a wave of strikes on Hezbollah last night, killing one of the group's top commanders. Ibrahim Mohammed Kabisi was among 6 people killed in Beirut. Attacks have also been continuing on southern Lebanon, where residents have been choosing between fleeing and sheltering. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that anyone who has a missile in their living room and a rocket in their garage will not have a home. Well, to bring us the latest, I'm joined now by Renad Mansour, Research Fellow in the Middle East and North Africa Programme and Project Director of the Iraq Initiative at Chatham House here in London. Good to have you with us. Let's talk a little bit about this attack involving the death of Ibrahim Mohammed Kabisi. He was among 6 people killed in Beirut, showing 2 things arguably. One, that Israel knows who they're targeting, but secondly, that Beirut is not the safe haven that many are hoping it to be.
Yes, that's right. We've seen significant escalation in the past few days. And since October 7th, we have seen attacks from Israel, but most of them have been in the south of the country, in sort of rural areas. It's slowly creeping into the cities. It's creeping into Beirut, the capital, and it's also wiping out, senior leaders. Most of the senior leadership of Hezbollah, a lot of the different command groups and the army of Hezbollah has been sort of attacked. It's become very clear that Israeli intelligence has penetrated Hezbollah and has been able to really effectively bring down what was assumed to be a sort of impenetrable fortress, which is Hezbollah, from its sort of claimed victory in 2006. So the reality is changing, and many Lebanese lives are now at stake. You've had the highest number of deaths since the Lebanese Civil War of 75 to 1990. So the situation is very, very violent in Beirut and elsewhere in Lebanon.
Indeed. I mean, this violence has intensified rather than abated, even after the brutality of Monday.
Yes, that's right. It's become very clear that there is this trajectory towards escalation. And, since almost a year, since October 7th, it's been sort of assumed that, this back and forth, Israel's attacks will not escalate to what we're seeing now. But I think certainly in the past week or two, it's been clear that there is this very sort of, there's a trajectory, and that trajectory is more violence before any resolution. And so we are to anticipate even more before any peace can come.
And the effect on Lebanon itself, I mean, the pictures that are coming out of the country is suggesting that thousands are now fleeing the south of the country, trying to find safety.
Yeah, Lebanon is a very small country. And the population is very close to Israel, and certainly now running away from these strikes. As targeted as Israel claims these attacks are, they are killing many civilians, and thousands are being injured, hundreds killed, children. And we're seeing a similar playbook in that, weapons being hidden in civilian areas, and different justifications for Israel's attacks on civilians. So the death toll, I fear, will only increase in the coming weeks.
And also the effect on Israel as well, because Hezbollah has claimed to have directly targeted at least 5 communities in northern Israel on Tuesday, which is a huge number of people's livelihoods and their communities. There is serious, absolutely no sign that Hezbollah is backing down either. It is intensifying too.
That's right. And, Hezbollah has been sort of put into this position that it has to respond somehow, but it has nowhere near the capabilities that Israel has, but certainly it will respond. And not just Hezbollah, Iran and its allies across the region, the Houthis, the PMFs in Iraq and Syria, there will be a response, and this will bring danger to those living in Israel, especially on the northern border. This is turning into that sort of regional war that many feared, and really it's the civilians across these areas that will be hit most. But this is something that very clearly is being instigated by the Israeli government in a way. But of course, Hezbollah is not backing down, and Hezbollah is also firing its rockets. You're right. In
the last 24 hours, though, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, has said that Israel is still open to ways to de-escalate tensions in Lebanon. He said that a diplomatic move is always better than a confrontation. Those words do not seem to be matching what you have just said in terms of what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, and you've had other Israeli officials say the opposite, even insofar as saying this doesn't end until they get to Iran. So yeah, there are different sort of rhetorics and different discourse coming from the Israeli leadership. Look, I think all of these conflicts are connected. If there is still no ceasefire in Gaza, there won't be any sort of resolution really to what's happening in Lebanon either. This is all very clearly a connected conflict across borders and engulfing a volatile region, and civilians are facing the worst of it.
And just building on that a little bit, there is that sense now that focus is coming off Gaza, isn't it? That the conversation in Israel is now shifting towards a potential war in the north.
And I think that to some extent is part of the strategy for especially the Israeli government. All of the news, all of the attention on its campaign, its brutal campaign in Gaza wasn't ideal. And so there is a kind of idea to how do we shift this? How do we broaden this war? And you've seen very clearly from October 7th, Israel looking to instigate. Israel has attacked and killed senior leaders of Hezbollah, of Iranian Revolutionary Guards, of others across the region in this way, trying to turn this into a transnational, a sort of regional conflict that isn't just about what's happening in Gaza, which is so brutal. And to some extent, it has worked now. The conversation has moved on to some extent from what's happening in Gaza towards what's happening in Lebanon and elsewhere, which is why I think we won't see a resolution anytime soon, because this is part of a strategy that has been in the works for several months.
And just explain or talk to us a little bit more about what any potential strategy could be to try to de-escalate this. We have the Biden administration and other nations across the Middle East trying to reach a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas to end the war in Gaza, to bring the hostages that were captured on October the 7th back safely to Israel. We now also have the de-escalation of fighting in Lebanon on the cards that needs to be addressed as well. But these talks have stalled, so whose voice could be heard here?
It's a difficult situation. In the past, many would turn to the Americans. There was a time when the U.S. was the sort of, unilateral power in this region, and it was able to have its have its way in a way. However, we've seen them unable to negotiate any kind of peace or ceasefire. And so it's this, the Middle East is also part of this changing geopolitical context, this changing multipolar context in which people don't know where to turn to for some kind of mediation. The UN has been proven ineffective and under attack, particularly by Israel. And so this is the kind of vacuum that we're seeing unfold in the Middle East. There needs to be some kind of resolution. There needs to be a coming of sides. Some people say it should be the region, countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, others, but they've also been unable really to come to to bring the sides together to negotiate this peace. There have been attempts. There hasn't really been. I think that I guess I would say the sort of the appetite for resolution at the moment isn't there as well. So I think we're just going to see more violence before we get anywhere near some kind of settlement.
Renad Mansour, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Well, we'll build now on a little bit on what Renad has just been talking about in terms of the US role on the global stage, because yesterday the US President Joe Biden gave his final address to the UN General Assembly, marking the end of a chapter in US foreign policy, which in his case, one that's lasted half a century. So the focus is now on his successor, the mark they will make on the world, and the role America now plays. Well, Brett Bruin is a former US diplomat who served as the Director of Global Engagement under President Barack Obama. And he sat down with our reporter H-Day Mai at the Yale Club in Midtown Manhattan yesterday to talk about the future of US foreign policy.
Biden's speech was just a reminder that he has been unable to deliver on a lot of those foreign policy promises that the world he will hand off to, whether it's Vice President Harris or former President Trump, is even worse in a lot of ways than the one that he inherited, albeit that, he's patched up some of the leaks in the dam of our allies' belief that America's retreating from the world stage.
Compared to where we were, when he took office in early 2021, how do you see America's role at the moment on the global stage?
I think we have fully entered a post-American era. And by that, I don't mean that America is absent, but our influence and our impact is substantially reduced. And what we're seeing is really a competition between mediocre powers, the Saudis, the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, for spheres of influence. And where those spheres overlap, you're seeing some of the tensions and some of the flare-ups. And, Biden, for all of his experience, for all of his worldly wisdom, was not able to find a way to make both our allies as well as our adversaries believe that America is truly back.
There has been some reporting, that world leaders here in New York are asking questions about should the former president, will we see a further disengagement by the U.S.?
I think there's a lot of worries should Trump get back to the Oval Office that we would see not just a repeat of version 1.0 where there was a lot of blustering and his threats to pull out of NATO, to pull out of other treaties, but also that Trump and his team have a greater knowledge of how government works now and could use that to very damaging effects. And that we could well see a situation in which the traditional guardrails even of rules and laws would be disregarded. It would require Europe to take a larger role. And yet it's not clear with Emmanuel Macron or Olaf Scholz or even Keir Starmer that any of them have, the capability right now with their weakened domestic standing to bite off an even bigger role on the world stage.
That was Brett Bruen, former US diplomat and the president of the public relations firm Global Situation Room. Well, to talk about this, I'm joined now by Elizabeth Brawl, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a columnist for foreign policy. A very good morning to you, Elizabeth.
Good morning.
So what we just heard from Brett is we have fully entered a post-America era where influence and impact has been substantially reduced. When did things start to go wrong?
Well, it depends on whether you call the waning American influence a negative development. But what I think where things started changing was actually where countries became increasingly economically powerful as a result of globalization, which has happened in this century. We have seen Russia become much more powerful than it was in the 90s, China extremely powerful as a result of globalization, and then lots of other countries ranging from India to the United Arab Emirates, and they not surprisingly want a stronger voice. They don't want to be told by the West what to do. We have seen it in many different situations that they take umbrage at being told what to do by the West, and especially by America. We've seen it most dramatically when it comes to the Ukraine war. And that's where we are today. America's influence is waning, but there is no superpower that is universally accepted as such replacing America. China is obviously trying to.
Just tell us a little bit more about whether it might not just be the influence of globalization dating back 30 or so years, but it might have been that moment, as we've just heard earlier on there from Brett Bruen, that it was Donald Trump who diminished America's standing in the world by forcing other nations to actually pick up the baton and sort themselves out.
Well, he has done nothing for America's reputation. He has harmed America's reputation. He has harmed America's reputation by violating America's commitments to various international treatments, including the Iran nuclear deal, and its commitment to its allies within NATO by suggesting that it wouldn't meet its obligations if they don't pay its obligation to defend them if they don't pay what he considers to be an appropriate amount. So he has harmed America's reputation, but equally, he is not the only person responsible for America's declining power. And so, if we look, for example, at the Iraq War, that too caused harm to America's standing in the world, and it hasn't really recovered since. But I think it's not. It would be unfair to blame America's waning power just on poor leadership by the Americans. It's also the result, as discussed, of other countries increasing power.
And the adjective used by Brett Bruen there is that these are other countries which are mediocre powers competing for spheres of influence, suggesting that there's, once you decentralize power, it becomes dispersed by people who perhaps are less equipped to deal with it.
Well, other powers would certainly not describe themselves as mediocre. And if we in the West apply liberal democracy as the measurement against which other countries are judged, then I suppose you could call them mediocre, but they would certainly not call themselves that. And it would be wrong for us in the West to assume that liberal democracy is right for everybody. What is right for everybody is for bodies like the United Nations to be taken seriously, because it's the only chance we have to solve problems and conflicts before they reach the stage of war. And what really worries me is that the United Nations is being weakened by countries increasing or declining desire to participate in multilateralism, and yet it's the only chance we have if we're going to save this world from wars and climate disaster.
Elizabeth Braw, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come on today's programme. The Boeing strike being resolved? Unlikely. Stay with us on The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's time now to continue with a look at today's newspapers. Joining me down the line from Nairobi is Navina Koto. A very good morning to you, Navina.
Good morning, Emma.
How's it looking?
It's looking a bit overcast, but we're hoping for sunshine in the next couple of hours. We're entering the warm season here.
Excellent. There's a professionalism now to your weather delivery. I get the impression that you've been practicing.
Yes, I have been.
You know what's coming on the first question, don't you? Right, second question, what's happening in the papers?
Well, I think one of the main stories here in the region is the crackdown or perceived crackdown against opposition parties in Tanzania. It all started with quite a cruel details about the abduction of an opposition politician. He allegedly had acid poured over his face. His funeral happened a couple of days ago. And then this week, the main opposition party, Chadema, was planning to protest against abductions, and the protests were shut down. Basically, the Chadema leaders were arrested, and there is quite a lot of discussion also in Tanzania about the way the country has been going, the turn it has been taking, and the question whether the president is becoming more and more autocratic.
Indeed. I mean, we have local elections in December and a national vote next year. I mean, one gets the impression that the build-up to this is what you have described. But what has brought about this burst of violence right now?
I think it has to do with the elections. It's the first time that Samia Suluhu Hassan, who came into power 2021, will be facing the vote of the people. I think there has been sort of expectation building up after she took over that the country would open up, that we are heading into proper multi-party elections. She did allow the right to assembly or reintroduce the right to assembly for political parties. Hence, we've been seeing demonstrations and political gatherings. She's also returned licenses to newspapers. But I think she is feeling the pressure from within the party to basically hold on to power, because this party has been in power since 1961, since independence. This outburst of violence that you have described, we've seen the Bar Association is speaking of around 80 abductions in the last couple of years, has also triggered quite a sort of candid reaction by Western diplomats. The US ambassador addressed a gathering and talked about the need to avoid assassinations, to stop with arbitrary arrests, and reminded Tanzania that the world was watching.
Let's move on to our next story about the Russian influence in Africa. A satellite deal has been struck between Moscow and Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso.
Yes, on Monday, the Russian aerospace agency Roscosmos signed this deal with the three governments. It's in order to provide telecommunications and surveillance satellites, but also broadcast TV and radio signals. The governments are talking about the possibility to surveil its borders where they have issues with jihadist movements and insurgencies better. I think we also have to expect that we will see much more Russian propaganda that has already kind of seeped into the coverage to be broadcast on these TV and radio signals. So it is something we come back to every couple of months, but it's a trend that seems to be solidifying.
Have we already seen signs of Russian influence, a sort of soft power initiative?
Apparently, there are now graffitis with Putin's portrait that you can see in the capital of Burkina Faso. At schools, content about Russia has been introduced. There's also pro-Kremlin propaganda being broadcast on social media, but also on radio channels. So, and from what I understand, there was also a press trip organized for West African journalists to visit the occupied parts of Ukraine to basically get a sense of the Russian view of this conflict. So I think there have been efforts all along. I think what has not been working out is this idea that the Russians are able to stabilize these countries. In the last couple of days, we saw quite a fierce jihadist attack on the airport in Bamako in Mali. So I think on that front, they have not been able to deliver yet.
Let's move on to our next story, which is if you want to go anywhere at the moment, you might be a bit stuck. There are strikes on at Nairobi Airport. Is that correct?
Yes, strikes at Nairobi Airport, and I think it is. It's not just about the strikes; it's also about a deal. So the Kenyan government has announced that it wants to give a 30-year lease for its biggest airport here in Nairobi to the Adani Group, an Indian group that offers all kinds of services. I looked it up. They do airport management, electricity generation, gas supply, food, and also weapons deals. Adani has promised to invest $1.85 billion to lease this airport for 30 years. I think the issue a lot of people here have is that it was kind of a secretive deal that was announced kind of all of the sudden. People are concerned about the conditions that the workers will have if this should go through. And the court has stopped the entire deal for now and has said that the government cannot sign these kind of deals without proper public information and public participation. I think the background to this is, in order to understand it, is that Kenya has signed a number of these kind of deals, also with the Chinese government, for example, to build an express highway to the airport and to upgrade the rail link. And the accusation is that these deals are very expensive, that they don't come with the results that are promised, and that the government or the state is then locked into these kind of deals for decades.
Let's move on to cars. And anybody who's ever sort of taken for a spin around your neck of the woods will know that basically there is only one car, and it's the Toyota Land Cruiser, and that's present right across the continent. And one wonders who had that conversation and why is it making the papers now?
There is a really interesting look at the popularity of the Toyota Prado and Land Cruiser here in Africa. I mean, in Kenya, it's very, very visible. It's quite an expensive car, I have to say. It costs around $73,000. It has an incredible resale value. Every time I see secondhand cars that are 20 years old being sold at well above $12,000, I wonder whether they're really such great cars, or whether it's just a sort of emotional value that's attached to the Toyota Land Cruiser. It's very popular here with Kenyan politicians, with wealthy Kenyans, with people who work for the UN. It's apparently also very wealthy, very popular, according to this article, with militias like the RSF in Sudan. They allegedly bought 1,000 of these vehicles back in 2019. And it reminded me of a conversation I had here with a Sudanese journalist who referred to this car as a Janjaweed car. I have to say, I don't find it very comfortable to sit in or drive in because it's very noisy. So I have opted for a little hybrid car, but I can't really impress the right people with it.
Which is such a shame, because this marvellous article in the Pan-African Review explains the story of how Toyota suddenly became the most important and the most beloved car, as you say, by certain sectors of society. And it says that just less than 40 years ago, the Land Rover was king, and I'm quoting here, the king of Africa's bad roads.
Yes, the Land Rover and what I didn't know, the Peugeot 404 was apparently very popular. The Peugeot 504 was very popular with Idi Amin, apparently. But then Toyota took over. It was seen as not Western. And here, definitely if you ask people, everyone prefers to drive a Toyota, even if it's not a big Prado, because they say the parts are easily available. It has a high resale value. So the brand is very, very strong, I have to say, much stronger than I expected.
I absolutely recommend anybody should read this article in the Pan-African Review, because it basically talks about the brutal history of the Toyota Land Cruiser and how it pervades so many parts of African society. Navina Koto, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. The time here in London is 7:30 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A quick look now at what else we're keeping an eye on today. British nationals in Lebanon have been told to leave the country immediately because of the worsening security situation there. 700 UK troops have been deployed to nearby Cyprus to help with any evacuation. The US Justice Department has filed an antitrust lawsuit against Visa, claiming the giant uses its size and dominance to stifle competition. The complaint accuses Visa of penalising merchants and banks who don't use Visa's own payment processing technology to process transactions. And Swiss police say they've arrested several people after the suspected death of a woman in a so-called suicide capsule. The capsule, named the Sarcopod by its inventor, was used for the first time on Monday afternoon in a forest close to the German border. Switzerland is one of the few countries in the world where assisted suicide is legal under certain conditions. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 7:31 here in London. We return to US politics now because the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has warned America's trading partners that they will lose their jobs to America if he wins, as he promised a new American industrialization. Meanwhile, his Democrat rival Kamala Harris has said she'll codify the abortion rights guaranteed with Roe v. Wade. Well, the latest Reuters poll gives Harris a 6-point lead. Another suggests the pair are neck and neck. But while all this is happening in the background, the government is bracing itself for a partial government shutdown within a week. And to tell us more, I'm joined now by Katie Gaddini, who's Associate Professor of Sociology at University College in London. A very good morning to you, Katie.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about this government shutdown. There is a September the 30th deadline here, isn't there? Could you just explain it for us, please?
Yeah, so the end of the fiscal year for the government is on the 30th of September, which is next week, and then the new fiscal year starts on October 1st. So basically, the government has to pass a bunch of spending bills or approve them for the next financial year. And right now, they're having a hard time agreeing on the finances of that budget.
At the moment, though, it stands as if some sort of resolution has come to pass, but it needs to be voted on today. Is that correct?
That is correct. So Mike Johnson, who's the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who's basically in charge of getting these bills approved for funding, had a choice, which is that he could continue to push kind of the hard right agenda for this financial plan, or he could work with Democrats across the aisle to put what's called a stopgap bill or a continuing resolution, which would kick the can down the road until December 20th. It would allow the government to stay open and give the government more time to try to reach an agreement on the budget until the 20th of December, when they'll have to vote again.
And this is becoming highly politicised, isn't it? Because we have the former president and presidential candidate Donald Trump encouraging Republicans to embrace a shutdown, to make it go wrong.
Yeah, one of the key things that's held up this process is that Trump has really called for an addition to the bill, which would make it more arduous for non-citizens to vote. Now, right now in America, if you're not a citizen, you're not allowed to vote in a national election. But what Trump is encouraging, and he has some support with hardline Republicans, is to create more proof of citizenship. So things like providing a birth certificate or a passport when it comes time to vote. Now, Democrats and some more centrist Republicans have said this is simply too onerous. This would make it hard for everyone to vote. And this should not be part of our financial package. And Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, had to decide, do I go with Trump and the hardline Republicans, or do I try to drop this provision and reach across the aisle? And he's chosen the latter. And as you mentioned, the House will be voting today on that.
We've been here before, but it does beg explaining. Why does this keep happening?
So this has happened at several points throughout history. It is worth noting that there's been an increase in shutdowns or shutdown threats since Trump first took office in 2016. Part of this reason is because we have a much more polarized government at the moment. There is less agreement about finances and how money should be spent. The longest shutdown that we had in the U.S. history was in 2018-19. 35 days the government was shut down over Trump's border wall, which he wanted funding for in the budget.
So tell us what happens next in terms of any kind of long-term solution to this, or is this just something that we're going to have again and again and again?
Well, that remains to be determined. So, as you know, the U.S. election decides our president on November 5th. It's coming up. So if Johnson gets this extension, which is looking very likely, then it'll get us through the election. And his hope is that by December 20th, there'll be a new president-elect. There'll be a little bit more agreement. It'll be easier to pass a bill. And then if that doesn't pass, they could kick the can down the road into the new year when the new government takes office, which, of course, Speaker Johnson is hoping will be Trump, and it'll be easier to pass some of these provisions. So I think a lot really depends on what happens in November and who's elected.
What are the practical implications of all this happening? The uncertainty about funding, the persistent threat of a government shutdown, running parallel to a presidential election?
I think it's indicative of the fact that the country is deeply divided. And as you mentioned in the recent polls that are coming out, some of them are showing that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are still neck and neck. And this is playing out across the board in the U.S., whether it's through violent eruptions that happen or whether it's through the Democrats and Republicans having to agree on a financial package for the next year.
And is there any sense that either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump as president will be able to resolve and create a more stable path, or is this just the way that things are?
Well, if we go by history, we know when Donald Trump is in office that the agreement around financial packages is even more contentious and more polarized. So if that's anything to go off, I think if there's another Trump presidency, it would be really hard to get support from the House and the Senate on financial bills. Now, if there's a Harris government, it will still be contentious. I would imagine it would be less so. There'd be less of these sort of outrageous financial propositions like a border wall or this new proof of citizenship just shoehorned in at the last minute.
Katie Gaddini, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You were the Globalist. 9:37 a.m. in Cairo, 8:37 a.m. in Zurich. Now, Egypt has sent a shipment of arms to Somalia for the second time in the space of a month. It has infuriated Egypt's long-standing rival Ethiopia, which says it's worried that the weapons could end up in the hands of terrorists. Well, to explain to us what's happening and give us a bit more context, I'm delighted to say that joining me in the studio is Bill Law, Middle East analyst and editor of Arab Digest. Good morning, Bill. Nice to have you back in the studio.
Good morning, Emma. Nice to be back.
Good to see you. So just explain to us exactly what has Egypt sent.
So they've sent anti-aircraft guns and the weapons that go along with that. And you look at that and you think, well, the big problem in Somalia is Al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist organization. And do you need anti-aircraft guns to deal with terrorists? Well, perhaps not. The Ethiopians, as you said, are concerned that the weapons could fall into the wrong hands, i.e. Al-Shabaab. There is this ongoing tension between the Ethiopians and the Egyptians, and it goes back to Gerd, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which has been under construction for a better part of a decade. Both Sudan and Egypt are concerned because it affects the flow of the Blue Nile. And this dam is a massive reservoir. The Ethiopians are building it for irrigation purposes, for hydroelectric purposes, which they desperately need. The Egyptians and Sudan are very concerned. What happens if there's a drought? Will the Ethiopians release more water? That's the issue there. What happened as well is that the Ethiopians, President Abiy Ahmed, is quite ambitious. He's settled a civil war in the north, and he's now made a deal, a memorandum of understanding with Somaliland, a breakaway chunk of Somalia, which has access to the Red Sea, to the Gulf of Aden, and finally to the Indian Ocean. That deal would involve a port that the Ethiopians would build, which would have potentially military implications as well as other implications. And in return, the Ethiopians would recognize Somaliland. No one else has done that. So you can see in this Horn of Africa, which is already an extremely volatile region, Emma, that tipping in some heavy weaponry is not really a recipe that one wants to see.
In that context, why would Egypt send weapons to Somalia?
Well, I think that in part it's a response to and a concern about the way that Abiy has handled Gerd, the dam and the negotiations there. I also think that, we look at the wider region, that rather than having diplomacy and conversations, that the leadership, be it President Sisi, be it Abiy Ahmed, be it Benjamin Netanyahu, see the military as the only way to solve issues. And so you see this increasing emphasis, I think, on militarization. As I said, in an already extraordinarily volatile and dangerous region, one would argue that the last thing that is needed is more weapons being poured in. But of course, look at us. Us in the UK and in America, we've been pouring weapons in the Middle East for decades and decades.
And it is that incredibly delicate balance that must be struck here. I mean, you have given us the context quite brilliantly. Thank you for that. The fact that Egypt has this dispute with Ethiopia because of the dam on the Blue Nile, and Somalia has fallen out with Ethiopia about this memorandum and the breakaway region of Somaliland to lease a portion of its coast. But then you also have the fact that these countries are not necessarily the most stable fiscally. And there is a knowledge that you, in certain circumstances, you shouldn't poke the bear. You shouldn't make things worse. What is it that do you think that's actually contributing to this sort of abandonment of a sort of cool heads?
Yeah, well, I think that that's a very big question, Emma. And I look at the situation that's going on right now, with the northern frontier, with the attacks on Lebanon. There are calls for restraint. There is urgings from President Biden, somewhat more muted urgings from our side of the pond, not to go to the military option, but this compulsion to use the military, this simplistic approach to very complex problems, and the use of military solutions really leads us and takes us to a place that, we don't want to contemplate, but on the other hand, we need to start looking at in order to try and force conversation as opposed to weaponization.
I think I've asked this question at least once on this programme today as we explore the sort of the shattering of poles. Where does a cool voice come from?
Where does the cool voice come from? Well, that is the question of the day. I'm not hearing it. What I'm hearing, and this is where I have to say disappointed with our new government. I think we should be coming out much more strongly as the cool voice, particularly in the Middle East. Britain has a long and I dare say not very proud tradition there in the Middle East. We could be doing more. We need to be doing more. We need to be saying more. And perhaps David Lammy will be that voice. I'm still waiting to hear it.
Bill Law, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist live on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Now, the union representing workers at Boeing in the US has reacted angrily to the firm submitting what is called a best and final offer in a pay dispute that's led to 33,000 workers going on strike. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAM, declined to put Boeing's proposal for a 30% pay rise over 4 years to a vote, saying the proposal wasn't negotiated with the union and did not meet members' demands. I'm joined now by the aviation analyst Sally Gethin. Good morning, Sally.
Morning.
So this was a proposal that was given higher than the one that had been put forward before, but crucially, it was not negotiated with the union.
That's what the union is saying. It does seem to be a fait accompli to them. I think, as you just said, it's raised their ire in many ways because recently they were in 2 days of negotiations with Boeing management with federal mediators present, and that didn't do any good. So I think really this is not just about the outcome, what the pay rise is and the improvements are. Obviously, that's the main part of it, but also being listened to by these workers. And actually, this will have significance for the future because as well as this going on, the Federal Aviation Administration, the regulator in the US, has said that Boeing, in any case, needs to improve its safety culture over several years, 3 to 5 years in the future. So really, it's important for the Boeing management to win the support of its workers. 32,000 workers are crucial to the long-term safety culture and health of the company.
So why did the management believe that this was the right option and the right approach?
Well, of course, that we haven't yet learned of the workings behind this by the management. It simply came out of the blue. I think it suggests to me there is some impatience, perhaps, and frustration by the management. They're hemorrhaging millions all the time, every day that this strike goes on. Their share price is dropping. They've instituted some severe measures like furloughing their workers 1 week out of every 4. And they're keen, obviously, to get the company, moving forward after all the major setbacks they've had this year, including that Alaska Airlines door plug blowout, which could have been very, very much more serious than it was. And they have new aircraft programs to fulfill, many airplane orders. So they offered this 30% pay rise. The workers are asking for 40%. But previously, Boeing management said that a previous offer was their final offer. So really, it's almost like a game of double bluff now. And the workers are saying, well, they said before that they had a final offer, but now they've increased it to 30%. We need to hold out for more. So, yeah, it's a very difficult sort of standoff situation.
In the meantime, we're actually seeing a financial impact here that that the strike is actually beginning to sort of have the sting which strikes are usually intended to create. We've got the Ryanair chief executive, Michael O'Leary, saying that Boeing has told him that the strike is going to delay aircraft deliveries by the length of the strike plus 2 or 3 weeks. I think Boeing is due to deliver, about 30 or so 737 MAX jets. I mean, that also becomes very bad for business for Boeing.
Yes, of course. So globally, there's supposed to be 146 aircraft deliveries till the year end of the 737 MAX. And they can deliver from the existing inventory, many aircraft, including the larger ones, the B777 and the B767 as well. But I think Michael O'Leary is always particularly vocal, and he almost it's like taking the pulse of the airline industry because he's the most vocal. But it does show the concern that airline customers have about taking those deliveries, and it's really about sustaining capacity to meet demand for air travel, not just over the coming months, but over the coming years. And Ryanair has staked its future on the B737 MAX in particular. So, of course, he's going to be leaning on the Boeing management to say, well, come on, where are these airplanes? You know, it not only does it affect the profitability of Ryanair, but for many airlines also to their shareholders as well. And of course, there is ongoing increased demand for air travel amongst the travelling public as well.
There is a issue that the FAA, let's touch briefly finally on the issue of safety, that Boeing is not allowed to increase production of its 737 MAX aircraft. Why? This is the time, arguably, that Boeing really needs to get its act together.
Yeah, actually, I've spoken personally to the deputy director of the FAA in the last 6 months when this cap was introduced, and just one-to-one, you know, informally. And she told me that basically they are not going to release that cap until they're actually convinced of the safety measures and culture improving at Boeing. They have that power and they're prepared to flex that muscle. They've put boots on the ground inside the factory there at Boeing with their own workers. They are taking a very keen interest. They were previously accused of almost collusion with Boeing over not having enough detachment and independence in approving safety at Boeing. So, of course, it's also about the optics as well. FAA does need to show that it's independent and it is enforcing safety, but at the same time, it really does take that duty seriously. So they're a long way off, Boeing, from getting to that point where the cap is released. So they really have to get through this bottleneck of the strike as quickly, but as in the best terms possible for both sides.
Sally Gethin, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. You were the Globalist. Finally, on today's programme, let's talk the latest from the world of technology. I am delighted to say that joining me in the studio with hands full of stuff is Monocle's technology correspondent, David Phelan. Good morning, David. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very good, thank you.
I'm very glad to hear it. So, you have brought stuff. What stuff have you brought, please?
Well, there's a little bit of a theme of, not in all the items we might talk about, but in two of the three, wearable tech.
Okay.
So headphones are obviously a very big deal in terms of wearable tech. And there's a brand called Nothing, based in London, set up by a man called Carl Pei, who used to co-run OnePlus.
Nothing?
Yes. I know. It's a great source of witty headlines, and they make phones and they make headphones. Nothing Phone 1, Nothing Phone 2, and this is their latest set of headphones, which are called Nothing Ear (brackets open) close brackets.
Okay, we'd start off quite simply with nothing, and then we have brackets. So that's they've lost me now. Hang on, David is handing me a nothing thing. This is going to get messy. All right, what is the nothing thing that I'm?
That is a pair of headphones. You can open that if you wish. That's the case for the headphones, and you will see that these are headphones, the little in-ear buds that have a weighted piece that goes around your ear. These are open ear buds, which there is something of a fashion for now, because it means you can stay connected to your environment. If you're jogging in the park, you can hear birdsong or you can hear traffic, but you still hear the sound as well. And ideally, the people around you won't hear the audio that you're playing. And that's one of the tricks that Nothing has pulled off with these earbuds, because although they are open, so they feel less pressurizing your ears, they feel like you're almost not wearing any, the sound goes straight into the ears, and they even manage to have quite a bit of bass, but the people around you don't hear them too much.
This is arguably a game changer, given the fact that you've suddenly made me think, why have people not been able to do this before?
Yes, indeed. Well, they have, but just not very well, and mostly only in open ears. But Bose have recently introduced open ears earbuds, and so have Huawei. Though the biggest brand that has open earbuds is Apple, and these are the latest AirPods, called AirPods 4.
I'm being handed another thing. It's more things. It's all sort of white. There's sort of that kind of like beautifully heavy, reassuring white plastic thing that's happening. May I just say that actually just at first glance, I can't tell you how many little white boxes are in the Nelson household, not always containing 2 earbuds. So there is a sort of effectively, I think we can safely say there might be a slight design issue, either that or sort of like a human issue, when it comes to the sort of the way that we treat our earpods.
I understand that.
Is that understandable, or is that just we just need to be tidier?
Well, what may improve your household is that
regular cleaning.
Both those sets of earbuds that you have in front of them have a Find My system, so that in the case of the AirPods, you can make the case. If you look at the bottom of the AirPods case, it's got a tiny little speaker on it. So if you lose the case, you can make it make a sound.
We have hundreds of cases.
Okay.
It's not the problem. May I just say that the Nothing thing, that's so hard to say, that the Nothing earphones are rather beautiful, rather handsome, but also they come in a well thought out package. They're like the size of a small glasses case, that you actually think they have enough substance that you'll pay more attention to them.
Yes, I'm delighted for your household already.
You should see the look on David's face. So tell us about the new Apple AirPods, which are going to go for a walk in our house.
Okay, AirPods 4 come in 2 versions, one with, one without active noise cancelling, and they replaced the AirPods 2nd and 3rd generation, which were both on sale. It makes the lineup a bit simpler, and it means that you can have the AirPods that you want, whether you want to pay less, £129 or $129, which, by the way, is the same price as the Nothing ones. They're £129, $149, or you can pay more, £179, $179 for ones with active noise cancelling built in.
Which one would you go for?
I think the active noise cancelling is great. The only thing I'd say is actually AirPods Pro 2 have been around for a while, and they're a bit more expensive, but they're often on sale. So if you can get them at a lower price, the AirPods Pro 2 are way better.
Okay, let's move on to messaging on your phones.
Yes, if you use an iPhone, you may have noticed that some of the people who message you come up as green bubbles instead of blue, and that's because they're using an Android phone instead of an iPhone, unless all your friends use iPhones, of course. And who cares about the colour? Well, actually, a lot of people do. But
why is that a thing?
It's a thing because the green is seen as less important messages because they don't have certain features. When you're sending a message, you've sent a message to someone on an iPhone, and when they're sending a message back, you get a little ... That tells you that's a typing indicator. You can't. Android has the same, but you can't get that to happen across Android and iPhone.
That's so childish.
Until today.
Oh.
iOS 18 has introduced RCS, that's Rich Communication Services, which is what Android uses, and they will make it much more compatible. They'll still be green, but you'll get typing indicators and what's called red receipts, so you know when the person has seen your message.
These are tiny things that are smoothing over, irritations. There's a bigger deal behind this, isn't it? And it's to do with the European Commission.
That's right. The European Commission has really been putting a lot of pressure on Apple in lots of ways, and one of the ways is to open that up their system, essentially. And this is one of the ways that they're doing it. The green bubbles are not as secure as the blue ones, but they are much better than they were a few days ago.
Is this a sign, very briefly, that there will have to be more forced collaboration and a better sense of will?
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. I think that's right. I think that Apple doesn't really want to open up its system for sure. It's going to have to open up even things like Apple Pay so that other companies can use the payments, the secure enclave that Apple uses, and they are reluctant to do that, to say the least.
David Phelan, thank you as ever for joining us in the studio. That's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers Tom Webb and Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Sana Jumani and our studio manager was Lily Austin. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.